It's so funny because I always drink wine or have a beer on my podcast for that reason. It just makes me feel comfortable.
I noticed on your show that you did that, and I noticed the guests appreciate it.
Yeah, they
Like they
do.
said a few things. They're like, "Thanks for giving me this drink." Like this is,
Yeah, so you're tapped in. Okay.
yeah.
The thing is too, like a lot of the times, surprisingly, like they request it even.
Mm.
Or if they like come, I'll have like an alcohol cabinet, just like what do
Oh,
you
that's
want?
good.
And usually, a lot of times, a lot of them want to take shots. Do you have any whiskey in that cup?
No, I
Okay,
wish.
so the spiked tea.
Yeah.
No judgment if you want to drink. And
I only have wine, and for some reason, it like wasn't
uh,
doing what I wanted it to do, and I was like, let me just try green tea. I feel like
what's your wine of choice?
Sauvignon Blanc.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
You?
white wine. I'm definitely more of a darker wine. I like
Okay.
Pinot.
Okay.
That's my like go-to Pinot Noir. But also I'm not too
Pinot Noir is
picky.
good.
Yeah.
I just find if you drink too much red wine the next day, like processing out of your body is a whole other mission if like in comparison to white wine.
That's a good point.
I don't know why.
You are paying for it the next
There's
day.
something about red
Yeah.
wine that my stomach doesn't agree with the next day.
I don't know.
Hmm.
The fermentation process or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's a good
'Cause,
guess though.
yeah, I mean the white
That
wine.
sounds smart.
White wine is sweeter, right? So is it more you're more prone to hangovers? Is that right? Or
I would think so. But the red wine just gets me so much more
Mm,
out of for whatever reason.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I like to even for conversation. I feel like the red wine at times is more helps me flow with the conversation. But I think it's all personal preference, you know.
I could see red wine being able to get like deeper.
Also aesthetically, I like it. Like, red wine, you know.
I feel like I haven't mastered the intros. Like I do the intros after the fact.
Oh,
So
you
you were like, how do
do.
you generally start? I'm like, I just like get into conversation and then I'll record the intro
I like that.
separately. But I think doing it in front of the person is good because it makes them feel confident as to why you wanted them on, which I think is something that you do really well.
Thank
That's what I was saying. I was
you.
like, you do that well because you'll take a moment, you'll speak to the camera, you'll like introduce the podcast, then tell them why the guest is there, who they are, you know.
Yeah,
It's a good little intro that I need to start adopting.
thanks for recognizing that and
Yeah.
being so tapped in on it. And it's something that, you know, I wasn't just born with for sure. Like I had to go through a lot of awkward starts in order to get to, because I feel like with anything, it takes practice because initially I was fumbling upon my words and I definitely, I wouldn't say like rehearse in the mirror or something like that, but I'm definitely well prepared when the guest comes. Like I have an opening dialogue that I have in my mind that I want to open up with that helps get the conversation going. And I also, you know, think that guests, for the most part, appreciate, to your point, when you introduce them and acknowledge why you're having them on, and then
Yeah.
also just some really high level accolades. And I think it's kind of like a respect thing too. You know what I mean? Like I want to introduce this person to my audience and also give them their flowers. I like big on people giving people their
Yeah.
flowers, especially early on. Like,
Yeah.
flowers. Seriously.
Yeah. I told you personally, but like my inspiration for having you on, I've been watching, I don't even know, when did you start your podcast? Because I feel like I've been watching for a while
Oh wow.
and been inspired for a while. Always thought you were really good. Like I never even saw a period of growth really where I was like, oh, I can tell he's much better now. Like I always thought you were really good.
Wow, appreciate
And
that.
yeah, and you got
Thank you.
great guests and just the way that you flow through the conversation. I've always admired your podcast. So
That means a lot to me,
Yeah.
honestly. Those words are why I actually do it, you know? Because similar to you, I mean, I make income from it in certain different pockets, but I'm not making like an influx of cash flow for that to be the sole purpose of driving me to make these episodes and have the podcast in general. So like when people tell me how it impacts them, that's the payoff for me. So, you know, what you're saying means more to me than any of the other factors that are at play. Yeah, I think a lot of people can be involved in things for the wrong reasons, but I just wanted to say that firstly because I've been working on trying to acknowledge people's words a lot better. And that's something I've grown in as well because I think there's a meme out there that it's like somebody tells you something that means so much to you. And in the back of your head, you're like, you have all these thoughts of like
Yes.
gratitude, but out of your mouth comes like thanks.
yeah.
And it's hard for me. It's been hard for me in my life to receive compliments for some reason, but I've been really working on acknowledging people's gratitude and, you know, kind words to me. So I just want to let you know I received that
Oh,
and I
I love
appreciate
that. That's actually a lesson I need to learn recently. I've
Mhm.
noticed in my personal relationships, if I'm receiving something they're articulating the way they feel, especially if it, on top of it, if it really matters to me. So I'm having a
Yeah.
moment where I'm taking it in and I'm feeling so much like physically and emotionally that I
Yeah.
can't process quick enough to make them feel comfortable for being vulnerable with me. So I feel like I end up leaving them hanging.
Yeah. No,
So it's
it's
really
a
good
very
that you,
common thing.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
really good that you've kind of trained yourself to take a moment, take it in, and give your response so they feel it's like a reciprocal
Thank
energy and
you.
sentiment.
Yeah, I've been trying to get better at it for sure. Shout out to my bro, Marco McKinnis. He
Mm,
kind of put me on to that whole idea, and I think it's a skill of its own, right? Like giving compliments, I think sometimes can be a lot easier than receiving them because
that's so
sometimes we
true.
don't know how to receive them. So I'm definitely working on it too. I'm not perfect at it, but like I've been trying a lot more. But to get back to your question,
Oh yeah, when you started.
I've been at this since specifically with Creative Ambiance since 2019.
Okay.
I started in June. June 1st was my first episode. I took a year off in 2022 just kind of to reevaluate and take a step back just because I was going so hard at one point. Leading up to that point, I had produced like 70 episodes in like 2 years or something like that.
Okay.
Not to say I was burnt out and like I didn't want to do it anymore because that definitely wasn't the case. I just think there was a lot of like life outside factors that were going on that I needed to take care of.
Mm.
So it caused me to take a year off, take a step back and reevaluate, which I needed. So I'm happy for that. But yeah, I started back in 2019. Prior to that, though, I did have experience when I was in college at a radio show at the school radio station, which was called KCSU. Initially, when I was in college, I played football. That was my main focus. And just realized that like, there's life after football, which I never really thought about until I was there and wanted to just pursue different interests that I had in my life and was inspired by a lot of collectives here in Los Angeles where, I was in college at Colorado State and out there culture is a lot different. There's not a whole lot of Los Angeles type of influences out there. So, I noticed the open market for that and wanted to start something out there. And that's honestly where Ambiance birth, like Creative Ambiance birth was out there in college.
Okay.
And I started the radio show in school and then that went on for a good 2 years. And I think that got me comfortable with talking in front of like a microphone. I know this can be a little bit long-winded, but once I graduated, which was in 2018, I realized that the whole corporate like day-to-day grind, not that it wasn't for me because like I still kind of am doing it in a way, but it didn't feed me and my purpose. I needed something else and something was missing. I didn't know what it was. I was working for like a year,
Yeah.
not doing anything else but working. And I was just like, what made me, I looked back, I was like, what made me happy back then when I was in college or when I was playing football? And I thought back to the radio show that I had and I was just like, you know what? Like, why not start it back up and just see what happens? And, at the time in 2019, I have a network of friends that do just like really cool shit. And that's what birthed it. Honestly, I was just like, nobody's really sharing the stories of my friends that are doing like this really cool shit. Like, why don't I kind of start to share those stories? And then it kind of just grew from there. Like the network just started to grow faster and faster and it became what it is today. But there's obviously a lot of other points within that story, but that's kind of how it
Yeah.
birthed.
I love that idea of when you're, because there's so many times as we grow as people, let's say for you, if football was making you happy for that period of time and that goes away for whatever reason, or you just evolve past a certain phase where something was making you happy for an extended period of time. And it's like, you're in this like empty, kind of like bare bones, like, who
Yeah.
am I? What do I like? What brings me joy? So sometimes just looking back for you was college. Sometimes you need to look back all the way to like what did I enjoy when I was like 6? Like when
Yeah.
was the last time I remember just feeling joy for the sake of joy? And can I recreate that in my life now?
That's
So
such
it's cool you
a
did that.
Yeah, that's such an insightful thought because a lot of people, whether you're listening to this right now or just in general, we've all come across times where we felt lost and maybe we were lacking purpose or meaning in our life. And I would recommend listening to Alyssa, like what you just said, like looking back in your life and figuring out what made you happy at one point, and getting back to that. They say disassociate to reassociate or disconnect to reconnect. Like sometimes you need to do that, take a step back. What made you happy? And how can you do more of that moving forward? So,
And sometimes going back to when you're a kid is the best way to do it because you were the most pure, you had nothing to prove. I think now
Yeah,
as we grow older, we get so attached to public perception that we choose things for other motivations we're not even realizing are unpure. Whether it's, I think there's some people that even choose professions based on how it would look in their bio or something like
that's a good
really
point.
superficial. Like, how would this look or how would it sound at a party? If you track back to when you were a kid and you had absolutely nothing to prove, you'll probably find some points of joy.
Yeah, did you have any points of joy that you
I
had when you were a
have a
kid?
I have a video of me when I'm 5 interviewing people.
No
Yeah, like,
way.
and where did I come up with
Wow.
that? You know what I mean? Like, how
Yeah.
could I was literally like, "Hi, I'm Elisa, I'm 5 years old." And I went around and I started interviewing family members. Like, so there's little things like that. Or I used to make up dances with my friends. So like recently I've been trying to get into dance classes, like just like
So
try
you're
to like,
actually practicing this in
yeah,
your own life.
yeah,
Okay.
just to like ignite a fire a little bit.
Can I ask you what made you start Break the Mold, or what kind of birthed the concept for you?
Yeah. I wanted to ask you. But I think maybe it could be like a similar story. For me, it was like feeling very lost. Like everybody around me following a very narrow path in terms of like what success looks like. And me not feeling not resonating with me. Like
Mm,
especially like when I was, let's say 17, it was like go to school, get a corporate job, work up the
yeah.
ladder, try to get something that has like benefits, retire, get a home, get back. Like it was all very like cookie cutter
Yeah.
and none of it was resonating with me. And I just had this thing in my mind where it was like, even though I don't know what I'm passionate about, I feel like fulfilling my potential would be a part of the process of identifying what my unique gifts are
Yes.
and living within that space.
Totally.
And like, so part of this podcast is like bringing to light other professions that are possible that you wouldn't find. Well, now because of the internet, people are finding different inspirations. But
Yeah,
for
more than
me, like
ever.
a friend recommended reading through an encyclopedia to find the
What?
encyclopedia of jobs. I was like,
That's
you
crazy.
know what I mean? Like it makes me sound like I'm 100 years old, but like still at the time, like I don't know
Yeah.
why he recommended that. And it was like very, he was doing insurance sales and I had a friend working at the bank and everything was just
I see.
very corporate and professional.
And
And
the
I
people who
felt
were around you were in that corporate
they were all in
lifestyle
that
as
corporate
well.
life, or even like speaking to girlfriends of mine, I would ask them like, what's their goal in life? And they would say being a mother and being a wife. And I was like, yeah, but like what else? Like,
Yeah, no, for
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And I just started to feel so isolated. So part of the inspiration was creating a space where people could get inspired and feel connected to other people that think like them. Because
Yeah.
it was only since moving to LA that I was like, oh, there's other people who are like me that want to do something different.
When did you move to LA?
2015.
2015, so it's 2023. It's been 8 years
It's been a
now.
while now.
Yeah,
But
well,
yeah.
I was telling you this off camera, but when you talk about like committing to a decision and kind of going all in, I know you guys can't see this, but the setup is so professional and so
Thanks.
nice. And it takes a certain level of commitment
Yeah.
and, investment in your dreams in order to make them come to fruition. And I think that is a perfect example of that. Like you moved to Los Angeles and we just met, but like I'm not sure what your life is looking like now, but I'm sure it's a lot different than that initial, thought was when you first had that realization that you don't want to have just a normal conventional life. You want to, more. So have you achieved more? Is that like
Yeah,
would you say?
I feel like it's a process of becoming like more and more who I really am. That's what
Okay.
life kind of feels like to me.
Yeah.
Getting closer and closer to who I really am.
Yeah.
And it's a process. Like
Absolutely.
even talking about that time frame where I feel isolated and I'm not relating to anybody around me. It's kind of like a dark space to be in
Oh, it is for
because nobody
sure.
wants to feel like an outsider.
Yeah, nobody wants to feel like an outsider at all. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel you on that. There's so many areas too that we can go. And I think that one of the things that I will say when I first started off, at least with my show, is that when I was thinking about, what I wanted to do, it was important for me to consider like the fact that I live in Los Angeles and I know of so many other collectives, shows that are doing so many great things. And I'm just like, where do I fit in here? Because I don't want to just be a carbon copy of somebody else, or I don't want to, copy somebody else's concepts. Like I want to be inspired by people, which I have been. I've been inspired by collectives and brands like, Selection and a lot of other ones. But I think it's important to not copy. And I was just, thinking about back then, where do I fit in? Where do I fit in this community? And that's what kind of birthed the idea of the podcast as well, because even in this kind of LA creative art space at the time, there was not a whole lot of, podcasts or publications or media companies that were covering this whole movement and renaissance that's been happening in the past 4 to 5 years. And I kind of had a realization to myself, like, this is probably where I can fit in. I love talking. I love sharing stories. I love helping other people. I've always been a very like intrinsic motivated person where I've always been into watching like motivational videos, and like ever since I was a kid, I remember I was just like always looking at YouTube and studying like motivational speakers and public speakers, and I wanted to exude that in my brand. So that's what I've been trying to do with Creative Ambiance, and that was kind of what birthed the initial like approach that I wanted, because there's so many ways you can go about it. You can, have a podcast and just have really big people on, and influencers and people have big followings, and cover hot topics, the clickbait stuff. But I never wanted to do that. Like, I always wanted to come from a place of genuine thoughts and real conversations, and I've never been driven by those other intrinsic motives. So that's where I was coming from initially, for sure.
Creative Ambiance, like, how did the name come about?
Back when I was in college, that's when the name Ambiance first started, and I had a business partner back then named Wesley, and we had the idea for the show, but we just didn't have a name for it. And I was just sitting on a lot of different names at the time, but I knew the meaning of what I wanted, and I knew the message that I wanted to get across, which is growth and positivity. And I wanted to champion guests that were pushing that in their lives, and I wanted to, put people on to different artists and creatives in hopes that they can get inspired and learn from them as well. And when I thought about the phrase growth and positivity, I was just thinking of like different types of phrases and words that was relative to that. And one of the ones that just really struck a chord with me for some reason was ambiance. And, ambiance is described as the character and feeling of an atmosphere, place, or environment. So it's basically, for lack of a better term, or in French, it's like a vibe. Ambiance is a vibe. And when I thought about the type of guests that I'm having on, they're creative. So Creative Ambiance. And I always incorporate usually like a plus symbol in my logo, and that's kind of like the ethos of what the brand is, like positive energy, positive atmosphere, positivity, and growth. And that's where the kind of plus sign kind of comes into play. So yeah, just one of those things. I don't even know how to correctly like say like I vetted it out. It just, when I for some reason thought about the word, I was like, oh no, this is the brand.
It like landed on you.
Exactly.
I feel like the same for breaking the mold. Like, even now, sometimes I'm like, breaking the mold, like, it sounds like a little generic. I think there's like 50 other podcasts that have the name.
Oh, really?
But at the time, I don't know what it was. I was just going about my day, and this was like an idea that had been marinating for like years, and it just hit me, breaking the mold, and I was like, that's it. So I think sometimes, like, if you have an idea and you're just letting it marinate in your mind or your spirit, like, eventually, like, something will just click, and you're like, that's it.
It's like when you know.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But you also have your slogan. It's sharing codes through conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how did that come about? It was mostly just...
That wasn't always the slogan. I kind of birthed that. No worries. No, in downtown LA, where I have my... Is that your dog?
My roommate.
Oh.
Why is she...
She wants to be part of the podcast, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, no, in downtown LA, like,
I
it's
can
just
imagine the
noises, sirens,
yeah.
and I'm just like, I have to
yeah.
just keep going. Like, I'm desensitized to noises at this point. But no, to get back to the subject matter, sharing codes through conversation was something that came to light, I'd say, last year. It wasn't something that, I started from the inception of the podcast. I think that, when I thought about what I was doing, it was having guests on that are sharing the codes literally through conversation. So it was pretty easy for me to come up with that, because every single guest that comes on, usually there's an underlying theme or there's a message that's getting pushed. And a lot of times they're pouring out the blueprint of whatever
That's what I was going to say, the blueprint. That's
yeah, they're
my
the codes.
perspective. Yeah.
Exactly. They're literally codes to life.
Yeah.
And they could help you achieve whatever it is. And my range of guests are very diverse. They range from, musicians, whether it's artists, DJs, producers, so on, to dancers, graphic designers, just fashion designers, creative entrepreneurs, photographers, videographers, video editors, and the list goes on, right? And it's been important for me to have a diverse range of guests from different mediums on because of that, the simple fact that I want to appeal to these different mediums that a creative realm is involved with. But secondly, what I've come to realize is that regardless of what medium that you're in, you know, the underlying theme of how to get to a point of success applies to every medium. And the guests usually, when they're, you know, giving the codes, it applies to you, whether you're a photographer, podcast host, a dancer, a musician. And that's something that I've had to learn like later on. And a lot of the times when I do interviews now, I don't really get into the technical aspects of things for that reason, because my audience is a lot of different creatives at this point, right? There are all of these things that I've mentioned, and it's less important for me to get into, you know, what software, what plugin did you use to create this song. I want something that's going to apply to the broader audience. And a lot of times the conversations that I have with my guests are different from any other interview or podcast that they've done for that reason, because usually when they're going on an episode, somebody just wants to talk about that song or you know, whatever specific medium that they're involved in. But you know, what I'm doing is getting inside the mind of how they operate. I'm talking about, you know, real life shit, you know, and I think that really resonates with different audience members. And I think that kind of separates me from other shows, because everything is so relative to everything else. And it's like, you can be, like I said, you don't even have to be creative. You could be a salesman, you can be a nurse, and you're going to get value from what the guests are saying. So
that was something I kind of struggled with, because like I had an interest. I was like, for people that are interested in this field, it's really insightful to hear those tips, but then that kind of alienates everybody else that would be listening. So I think the approach that you did is probably the best.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not the easiest thing to do. And you know, when you start off, usually you don't even know what your own brand identity is, and that's, you know, completely okay. And I want people to know that you don't need to have it all figured out when you start, because I think what holds a lot of people back is they don't have it all figured out when they start, and it's very intimidating. You know, I can attest to that. You can attest to that. But it's okay to just, you know, start with a vague sense of what you want to do and have it figure itself out as you go. I think there's something to be said about intentionality, but I think there's a fine balance between not being too like strict on where you want this to go, because what if you're blocking a blessing by not letting it grow into something that it could have been, because you're just trying to force, like, I want this to be a specific niche on this, when it doesn't necessarily have to be. So I think it's completely okay to just start and let it be what it's going to be.
And that's with everything in life.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask if you have the connection. I know you said your friends are creative, but if you have a personal stake in why you think it's important to get creative stories to the forefront.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because at first it wasn't always creatives. I just, like I said earlier, I had a lot of friends that were just doing cool shit in general. Like I had friends that were in the NFL, the MLB, some that were creative, some that just had really cool jobs, entrepreneurs, fitness, things like that. That's how I started. And then once I think I got to like episode like 10 to 15, I noticed that like my audience was growing a lot more tailored towards creatives. And I've always been such a big fan of different creative mediums, like whether that's photography, videography, different music genres, different music mediums. And I think that's just where my interest led me most to. And I've never been a musician myself. I've never, you know, have been involved in these other mediums and aspects. When I thought about it originally, it goes back to that kind of theme of like, where do I fit in here? You know what I mean? Because it was also back then, it was probably a toxic thought that I had, where I thought that I wasn't like good enough. And my friends were just, that were doing these type of things, were at such a high level. I thought it would be like disrespect for me to even try an attempt to be that as well. You know what I mean? So when I thought back to like, where do I fit in? That's kind of how I thought I fit in. I was just like, I want to be the one to share these stories, archive, you know, these moments in time, and document stuff for the culture. And I think that's an important role just as equally as it is to be those things. So it probably was not a good thought back then, because my mindset is a lot different now. I think, talking to creatives and having these conversations with so many different people in the community, I think it's possible to really do anything if you commit yourself to it. There's obviously like God-given skills that are involved at times, but like there should be nothing that holds you back if you really want to get into something. So my mind should have has shifted a little bit, but it's just I'm just a fan of this shit, and that's what kind of led me to having it be just creative, niched.
That's a vulnerable point that I think we all go through. Just like when you put something on a pedestal and you have so much respect for it, you almost feel just afraid to even attempt to pursue it because you admire it so much. Where I actually felt almost the opposite when it came to doing the podcast. It was like, not in terms of pursuing what they would pursue, but it was like, how could I even have a podcast talking about art and creativity if I'm not exercising art and creativity? Like I felt like an imposter in that kind of way.
Imposter syndrome.
So it's just like a different angle.
I see what you mean.
But like similar sentiment.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely something I struggled with too. Because you almost feel like a poser.
Yeah.
Like if you're trying to be an expert in some field that you may not be well versed in or have put in hours for. And it's intimidating, I think, more intimidating now than ever because of social media, because of societal pressures. You're exposed to people doing things at such a high level. It's a shame that it deters a lot of people from getting into things because they don't think that they can do it at the level. But it's important for people to understand that whoever it is that you're looking at on social media, whoever it is that you're aspiring to be or that you're inspired by in general, has been doing what they've done for a long time. So it's okay to start out and suck. Like I for sure sucked when I started. Like I look back at those first few episodes and like cringe when I think about like how I was presenting, the guests or just my vocabulary or my filler words, whatever it is. Yeah, it's okay to suck to start for sure.
That's the biggest point too, like allowing yourself to evolve. Like you need to allow yourself to go through the process in order to grow. Like you can't think your way into growth. You actually have to put it into action and scrape and fall and get better and better. It's the only way to do it. So it's a point of courage.
You have to fail.
Yeah.
You have to fail and learn from it and pick yourself up, and you have to be vulnerable enough to fail correctly too, because I'm going back to this kind of theme of committing to something at the level that you're kind of committing to, for example, or committing to something fully. It takes a certain level of vulnerability, to understand that you can fall on your face and fuck up, and it's going to be okay moving forward. And you have to go into it with that thought, because you can't be afraid to fail. If you are, you're never going to give yourself that full commitment and be vulnerable 100%. And they're all kind of intertwined. You have to be vulnerable, you have to commit, and you have to be okay with failing. And I feel like people who execute those well are more attuned to achieving what they want to achieve, whatever it is, whether it's the money, whether it's the fame, whether it's the passion, whatever it is that you're going after. Like if you do those three things in the correct way, I think that it'll help you get what you want a lot faster.
Yeah, I think you have to be okay with showing that you care. I used to have a thing where in order to safeguard my failure, I would want to present myself as if I don't care. Like I'll try, but I'm gonna try and show myself as if like I didn't put too much effort. So I would only go maybe 15%. So just in case it doesn't work out, I don't look stupid or I don't feel embarrassed because I really tried and it didn't work out. So it was like a self-defense.
Yeah.
And now like I'm doing all this, like it doesn't matter if I'm getting 10 views, that's me fulfilling my vision and I feel good with that.
That's good. Congratulations on like coming to that level. That's definitely a thing. Like you're protecting your future self from some rejection or embarrassment.
Because you really tried and you failed. At least if I didn't really try, it's not too bad.
Yeah, 100%. But when you think about that, on the other end, I think you think that people care a lot more than they actually do.
Yeah.
Everybody is so busy in their lives. They're not really, unless they're like a super hater, they're not really like watching it like
but
a
you probably only have like one if you're lucky.
Exactly. And even if it's one person, like the odds of that one person versus the other hundreds or thousands of supporters you have outweighs it. But you don't realize it because you're watching yourself and you're so critical of yourself that people aren't as tapped in on you as you think, So if you fail, Like, it's okay. People aren't thinking the negative thoughts that you're thinking about yourself, is at least in my eyes, what I think
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. You were saying that you saw the audience grow towards the creative subjects.
Mhm.
Do you, in terms of people that are interested in becoming a podcast host and getting into this space, what do you think are important metrics? Because even me, I was figuring it out. Like, should I be paying attention to the numbers I'm getting on social media, my downloads, my reviews? I guess it's a mix of both, but like through your experience, what do you think are some actual important metrics to pay attention to?
That's an interesting question and a good question as
Yeah.
well. I would say at first, I think it's really important to not even pay attention to the numbers to begin
That's the
with.
best answer, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think you should be focused more on your own personal growth and evaluate yourself based off of some of the more soft skills, and things that you can recognize about yourself. There's only so many things you could focus on, but if you focus on getting better in certain aspects, like as a podcast host, I think something that you realize that at least at first is how many filler words that you use, which I still use for sure.
Yeah.
And
someone pointed it out to me recently, and now I'm self-conscious when I speak, and I'm like, I'm almost having to choose between confidently delivering a message or having filler words.
Exactly.
Like,
and I'm sure you listen back to your episodes and you edit them and whatnot, and you notice it way more than other people.
Yeah.
But that's just an example of like, okay, that deserves its own time to devote towards getting better at. And then there's other things that we're kind of talking about, smaller things, the way you communicate, your storyline, how well you prepare. There's so many things to work on. I think setting a solid foundation is the most important part at first, not the numbers. But to answer your question, as you move on towards getting a little bit more experience in the game, I think you should pay attention to where your audience is at the most and devote and prioritize your time towards there. Like, for example, for me, Instagram and YouTube is probably the number one highest audience that I have in terms of like whether it's followers, whether it's subscribers, whether it's like engagement metrics, whether it's comments, likes, whatever it is. That's where my content resonates the most, right? So I want to ensure that I'm putting my most effort into producing content on those platforms. There's a lot of other aspects that are at play, right? With the audio aspects. There's, TikTok, Twitter, a variety of different ones. And I think it's important to feed those. Your audience is going to tell you where they like your content the most, right? And I think that it's important to focus on those because we only have so many hours in the day. Unless you have the time, bandwidth, and budget to support a team that can dedicate.
I know it's about the team if you can get one.
Yeah, exactly. And, I'd love to say that you should support equal time to helping yourself get more numbers and analytics and other channels. Unfortunately, that's a hard point to get to. And I think that when you do grow to a point where you can have a team dedicated towards those other channels and efforts, I think it's important to do that. Speaking for a large majority of people that start off with podcasts, you're usually by yourself. Maybe you have a couple partners or employees with you. Your bandwidth is only so limited. So in that sense, I think it's important to prioritize where your audience exists the most. And for me, that's YouTube and Instagram. So that's where I dedicate most of my time to. But with that said, you can repurpose your content, right? Like it's easy and it's very important. I think number one thing, at least in starting off a podcast, is the video aspect, which you're doing a great job at, because you can repurpose this content across TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, Threads. Forgive me if I'm missing any. Shorts, YouTube Shorts. Like, I use the same clips, resize them a little bit, and when I take a look at like the overall analytics of each episode, they all chip in. Like the number, you could get 25,000 views on a YouTube video, right, on our episode, which is really hard to do. Or you can get 25,000 views across like 7 different channels. And it doesn't take that much effort if you just repurpose pre-existing content that you already have. So that would be my probably biggest advice, is just repurposing your content across different channels.
So you pay attention more so to views. I mean, if you want to make podcasts a living, would you say it's like the views across channels that you can accumulate and then present in a media kit and try to get sponsorships that way? That'd be like the main avenue, maybe?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't even know yet.
No, I think so. And I think I have a good take on this because I also have a day job. I'd say my Creative Ambiance passion is I put in probably just as much time as I do my day job. But in my day job, I do digital marketing where it's very analytics based, and we do different types of partnerships with a lot of different companies, and sometimes they're even podcasts, and some are different types of publications. And usually when we're doing buys with them or we're doing partnerships with them, we focus on mainly it's like a vanity metric, whether it's like CPM, cost per impression, or it's acquisition type of metrics, how many, whether it's like a sign up that, the company is looking for, whether it's, a product that they're trying to purchase, there's like cost per acquisition metrics that are involved. And usually for the most part, companies care about that number as a whole. So it's like, if you can get them to like a certain CPM, like a certain amount of impressions, whether it's like 25,000, 50,000, whatever it is, or whether you can get them to like, you want to drive a certain amount of people to their website or their app, or a certain amount of revenue, they care about what that total number is. So if you can get there through audio, TikTok videos, Instagram videos, Twitter videos, your YouTube videos, your shorts, stories, if you could just get them to that number, like most companies are okay with that. So I think it's important to leverage the fact that you have a presence on different social media platforms, and it can help get them to that number that they're looking for, right? So that's how I would best answer that.
Yeah. Something you said before that I thought was interesting is that you don't focus specifically on somebody that just has a big platform, which I think I do the same, because there's certain people that I could have potentially asked that have a large following, and maybe them resharing could have been a benefit to the show.
Yeah.
For me, there's like something specific I look for in the person and in terms of the types of conversation I want to have.
Totally.
So I'm curious what your gauge point is when you're deciding who's going to come on the show.
That is a great question. And it's ironed itself out as I've done more and more episodes. Or initially, I was much more broader and open than I am now. I'm very, very intentional with my guests that I have on, because over the years, you realize this takes a long time, right? The scheduling process, the setting up process, the prep process, marketing the episodes, editing the episodes, developing that relationship with the guests. There's so many hours that are involved in it that I'm not willing anymore to do favors for people that want to ask to be on the show, where I used to do a lot more favors than I wanted to, and just realize, like, why am I having this person on that I'm not really passionate about talking to, just because they have a following or just because they know a certain person. I don't have enough time. Life's too short for me to devote this amount of time to something I'm not passionate about. So that's kind of my mindset at this point. But to answer your question about like what it is about that person, usually they're in a certain pocket of a creative space that's kind of located in the Los Angeles area. There's a community of creatives, I think, that I have managed to develop relationships with just within this community. So usually it's if they're involved in this community. Also a variety of different aspects, like what is their like identity? You know what I mean? What do they represent as an artist or creative, or what do they represent as an entrepreneur? What is their brand pushing? Like, what's their message? Yeah. That's more important to me than a lot of other things as well, because, somebody could have all types of clout in the world, but like, what did they do to get that clout? What have they done to get to where they're at? And also, like, what type of value do they provide to guests? A lot of the times, if somebody has gotten to a certain level in their career, chances are they have codes that they're going to share to the audience. And I want to make sure that the people that I have on, are providing value in that way. There's so many other things that also go into it. Like diversity is very important to me as well. Whether that's having people of color, whether that's having women on, whether that's having, like we already talked about diversity in mediums. Like I think about all that stuff. And also just the type of person they are. Usually at this point, I'm usually getting guests through like word of mouth, through people getting recommended, and I vet them and I'll see like if they're a good fit for the podcast just based off of my brand identity. So at this point, it's just there's something about a person that I want to talk to based off of those different factors. And there's some that I'm probably not mentioning right now, but I'd say, I don't know if this makes sense to you, but
It
there's usually an
does
it
fully.
factor
Yeah.
like about
Okay.
somebody that I want to talk to. So
Yeah. I think the passion portion too, like I can't fake it, and I really don't want to put this amount of attention and focus if I'm not genuinely feeling drawn to speaking to them.
yeah,
Like there's been times where even like I'm like crafting a message to somebody just because I know it could be a move in terms of platform or
yeah,
exposure, and I'm like, there's no life in it. And a
yeah.
lot of times I've noticed I won't get a response from the ones that I faked. And I'm like, could they like sense
Oh
that there was
yeah.
no enthusiasm?
You never, it's an energy thing
It's
for
an energy
sure.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some, it's, we could do all we can to try to vet that and like
Hmm.
have a good person on. There's been definitely times where I thought somebody would be a great guest from optics, right? And a lot of times it's not
Just really good at they're branding themselves.
exactly. And then
Okay.
like you have them on and they're not really who you thought they were.
Mm.
And there's nothing you could do about that, right? Because you don't, unless you know the person, you have a pre-developed relationship with them. It doesn't always happen all the time. You have no real way of like knowing how they're going to actually be as a guest or as a person, or they don't necessarily even have to be a good talker. Like is it easier on you as a guest when they're a good talker and they're like they can convey their thoughts and articulate their thoughts really well. Like that's amazing and I love those episodes. But there's a lot of times also when there's guests, and I think I was talking about this when we first started, but I think a lot of creatives are introverted.
Mm.
Oftentimes when you're really good at certain mediums, there's been a lot of cases where there's been introverted creatives that I've had on, and that's completely okay. You know what I mean? And I think it challenges you as a host to bring out those thoughts and ask the right questions and guide the conversation in a way that makes them feel comfortable,
Hmm.
because you can't just be a cookie cutter host, right? Like you can't just use the same questions, have the same approach to every guest. Every guest is different. So you need to plan and articulate your questions in a way that helps them feel comfortable. And I love a challenge. So like
Mm.
even when a guest isn't the best speaker, like I want to use those as learning moments for me to help make them feel comfortable. What can I do to make them feel comfortable enough and vulnerable enough to open up? Because it's not always an easy thing to do,
For sure.
A lot of people aren't made for public speaking, and that's completely okay. But there's still gems and there's still codes that they have to share
Hmm.
with the world. You just have to ask the right questions to bring it out. So
Hmm. I don't know if we spoke about it before or if I was speaking about it with Chris, but we were talking
mhm,
about the more nervous you are, the more you care about something,
mhm.
the more you stiffen up. So let's say a guest you've been really looking forward to. Like I know you had Joe K on recently and
Yes,
you were
yes,
like, this
yes.
is like I wish I could frame
The
this moment, which I
conversation.
guess you could. Like you have a
I'm going
photo.
to for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like in the moments like that where it's somebody that's like a real full circle moment for you, do you find yourself feeling like more self-conscious, more anxious, like having a harder time getting into that flow?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. And you're asking great questions. I keep saying, I
Thanks.
feel like you keep saying that this is a good question because they are good questions. Um, for the Joe K episode, for example, I was ready for that one because
Okay.
he was such a big influence on me even starting Creative Ambiance, and just like I've been studying his moves just as as a tastemaker, as a founder, and just everything that he does. And also like he comes from a similar area as I do, and I feel like we have a lot of similarities just in terms of like mindset and the way we move. When I started off the podcast, it's funny, like I feel like I had a hit list of top people that I wanted to have on the show, and he was up there. So I've always envisioned, having him on. I always knew it was going to happen. It was just like a matter of when, and I'm so grateful for him, excuse me, for making it happen. In instances like that, I think that it's important to make sure that you capitalize on the moment, because that's for sure the biggest,
Living in the moment. Okay.
yeah, that's for sure the biggest like interview that I've had thus far,
Hmm.
in terms of impact, in terms of numbers, in terms of reception from my audience. I put a lot of time and effort into every interview that I do, but you have to realize that some moments are bigger than others. And when those moments are bigger than others, it deserves more time and attention
Okay.
than others. And that was, a time that I made sure that I had all my P's and Q's crossed, put my all into making sure that the episode was produced as well as it can be. And I feel like I left it all out. Like I made sure that I had every T crossed and I dotted,
Hmm.
and I think it showed in the episode as well. So
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
I think you answered it in a way that most people wouldn't have. I think a lot of people would agree in high pressure moments when they want something to go so well is kind of when they end up flopping,
yes, yes,
but
yes, yes.
you took the moment and you actually shined because of your preparation.
Exactly. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
for sure. So I was nervous, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, like
I was
that you
ups
can't get rid of, really.
Yeah, and like you
If you care,
said,
you're going to be a bit nervous.
exactly. Yeah. If you care, you're gonna be nervous.
Hmm.
It's okay. I think, Kobe has that famous saying that he said with Jay Shetty, who I love his podcast as well, where he kind of mentioned that it's okay to have emotions. Oftentimes people want to shy from the emotions, but it's important to digest those emotions and feel them. And then you can decide what you want to do with those emotions. So, like, if I'm feeling nervous, it's like, okay, I'm nervous, but, it's because I'm excited. In order to properly execute what you're trying to do, if you prepare correctly, then you will be way better off in not fumbling. You're going to be nervous, but like nervousness also can come from a place of being unprepared
For
too.
sure.
If you prepare properly, it helps a lot with being nervous, I'd say.
Hmm.
So,
When you said when you first started, you had that hit list and he
yeah.
was one of the top people, the way you described it was kind of like visualization, manifestation. Do you
Totally.
believe in that?
I
Is that
believe,
something you practice? Because that's what it sounds like.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's funny because I talk about this a lot with guests, and my perception and mindset has changed so much throughout my tenure of doing this because so many of my guests have these great, perspectives that I adopt. And the whole topic of manifestation is definitely one of them because I've probably talked to every one of my guests about it. And I think what I believe most in regards to manifestation is it is important to, talk about it and envision it happening, but you have to put in the work to make it happen. And there is two parts to it, right? Like you speak it into existence, but also because you can say something that's going to happen, you can speak it into existence, and then intrinsically, like in your mind, you can it can make you feel like you already won.
Because you felt the emotion. It's as if you
Exactly.
experienced it.
Yeah, you prematurely,
Hmm.
getting that emotion of winning, that dopamine hit of it happening already. And you're
Yeah.
so excited about the thought
Yeah.
that you kind of fumble the back end part of it
Hmm.
about actually making it happen. But you can also use that initial like speaking of it into existence as motivation. Like let's say I'm talking to you about wanting to make something happen,
Hmm.
and I use it as a motivating factor to like, okay, like I said it to her, like now it's like an accountability thing. Like I said it to somebody, I have to make it happen no matter what it takes to make it happen.
Yeah.
And there's very few people that can do that, that can use it as an accountability factor. And it takes a certain self-discipline, I think, to make that happen versus saying it. Because I've definitely done this. I feel like we've all done it. You've said you're going to do something and it felt so good and you just never followed through. It's
Hmm.
easy to do.
So many
So
times. Yeah.
it takes a certain level of self-consciousness to realize you need to be accountable for the things you say and actually make them happen. So I didn't necessarily, I'd say, speak the Joe K episode into existence, but I definitely believed in myself enough to make it happen. And I still do. Like I have a high level of confidence in myself, and I think that I can do a lot of things. Like I think that I can make a lot of different things happen. It's just a matter of like me versus me, right? Like I know there's certain things that I need to do in order to make the things that I want happen. And that was one that was big. And I think there's also a lesson that I want to like get to here with that. Sometimes like building relationships with people takes a lot more investment than you think. Like in that instance, for example, like you can't just get to the person that you want oftentimes through a DM or just like running into them at certain places. Like you have to make them comfortable with you being around. And I think it's important to, surround yourself with the same people that person that you're trying to get to is around. If this whoever the person is that you're trying to get to or have a relationship with shows up in certain places and hangs around certain people, you have to kind of like maneuver your way into that circle first, like and get to know the people that are around that person, not just expect to like get what you want from a certain person, or not even get what you want, just develop a relationship. So I just wanted to point that out. It's important to like develop relationships and actually be genuine with it and not just be transactional, because there's a lot of that.
Oh my God, I was just talking about that today.
Were you?
Yeah.
But no, I was gonna say the thing about transactional relationships too, I think, is it takes both parties to want to have a genuine relationship with one another. Because if you're wanting to have a genuine relationship with somebody and you're working at being relational, and the other person has a transactional mindset, no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to have the type of relationship that you want with that person, because they're already fixated on that transactional aspect of it, and they already operate in that sense. So I think that's also probably why it's so rare to not have transactional relationships, because both people have to be on the same page, at least in my eyes.
What's your perspective on if you have somebody in your life that's just their mindset? Like, it's not for the fact that they don't care about you, or, it's just that's how they operate in the world. Everything is like a tit for tat situation. Would you internalize that as that's just the way they are? We could still have a deep relationship, or it's if that's the way you operate, it doesn't make me feel like we're as connected, so I'm never going to get to that point with you.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I think people serve different roles in people's life. If somebody moves in a way that is only transactional to a certain point, then that's completely fine. Like, I think that you, however, are going to be treated as a transactional relationship, right? So if you're serving me an energy of just like, hey, I'm only contacting you when I need something, and when I don't need something from you, you're kind of not dead to me, but like we can kind of
or
serve
I'll
no
do this
purpose.
for you, but there needs to be a kickback of some sort.
Exactly. There has to be a mutual benefit. And I mean, there's so many things in the world that operate off mutually beneficial factors, which is fine in itself too. Like, you shouldn't shy away from that. I think it's okay to for somebody to want a transactional relationship with another person, but like, just expect to receive that same energy back from the other person, because you can only do so much if you're looking to not be transactional with somebody who's transactional. And yeah, it's okay to have transactional relationships as well. But I think that the meaning of life is to have relationships with people. And it can be difficult, I think, in our space to, maintain relationships that aren't transactional. For me specifically, because everybody I talk to as a guest, I have a certain level of a relationship with them, and it takes a lot of energy to nurture relationships. And there's only so much time in the day that we have with just life, family, friends, work, having a relationship with guests. And I wish I could have more of a relationship with them, because I've developed such a good experience through having them on, and have developed a good relationship with them in general. But I find it hard to nurture it, because I just meet so many people that it's hard to continue to stay tapped in with them, if that makes sense, because I'm just constantly moving. I don't know if you find that 100%. Similar. But
I feel guilty because, like you said, there's so many people that I would like to cultivate a relationship with, but I only have so much bandwidth. There's everything you're doing, but you have your job, you have your side projects, you have, all these other relationships that are important to you that have been there for who knows how long. Exactly. That you meet new people and you're like, oh, I really want to cultivate this connection. Yeah. But I only have so much time. So it's for sure a struggle.
Exactly. And I mean, like anything else in life, you're going to prioritize it though. Like, if it's that important to you, you'll make it a priority. And I think that's something I've been working on a lot, is continuing to nurture relationships. And it's something that is always going to be a process. It's something you have to work at constantly. So I'm not the best at it, but I do value having real relationships with people and not always being transactional. And I've always found the experience of who I'm working with, that I have a relationship with, is always just so much more pleasant when it's, comes from a place of having genuine intentions versus just like wanting something from that person. And I would hope that I don't ever make somebody else feel like that when I ask of something from somebody else, because I wouldn't want that done upon me. So
I think it was such a good piece of advice where you said, like, just surround yourself in the spaces of the people that you want to connect with.
Yes.
Because I think some people were kind of bred with the idea of like, have an elevator pitch ready.
Yeah.
So they see that person that they've wanted to connect with, and they're looking at it from such a transactional point of view that they think, let me have my elevator pitch ready for this person. It's like, this person does not care. They don't feel
Yeah,
comfortable. They've never seen you before. Why would they want to invest in whatever you're doing? Like, I think, yeah, I think we were conditioned to have something like that ready, but I don't think
totally.
that really works in the real world.
No, it doesn't. I
Yeah.
mean, especially if you want it to come from a genuine
Yeah.
place. Like, I think it's okay to want to get to a certain person. Like, it's completely okay to want to do that. But you can do it in a way that's genuine. You know what I mean? You could also do it in a way that's transactional. I don't think you're going to get very far in the transactional way, but if you do it in from a genuine place and have genuine intentions, it's going to take a long time. Like sometimes you're not going to get to the person you want to get to for 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years even. But if you're coming from a place of genuine intentions, that shouldn't matter.
Right.
You know, if you're coming from a transactional mindset, you're going to get frustrated when you're not getting to that person in 1 to 2 years. But if you're just constantly planting seeds here and there, eventually those seeds are going to grow and you're going to reap the benefits of something that, of an effort that you did 2 or 3 years ago. And I think it's just a constant flow thing like that. Like you're constantly planting seeds, you know, watering them, aka watering the relationships, and they're gonna sprout at different times, but you just can't have expectations. Like if you don't end up getting to that person you want to get to, like you should be okay with that. And different things come out of it too, you know what I mean? The relationships that you develop from people that you're, you know, connected to by trying to get to that person could end up developing into relationships that help you a lot more than you thought that person you were trying to get to was. So just coming into a genuine intentions is everything.
For sure. I think if you're thinking about it as like just a checkbox you're trying to tick and
Yeah.
it's not genuine, you're going to get frustrated in terms of timelines because you're thinking about it how only about you and how it's serving you, and you have these certain timelines, and like that person is more of a function than a human being.
Yeah.
So that's where you get into trouble. But I'm curious about your perspective on timelines, because you do have your full job and you have the podcast. Like, do you put that kind of pressure on yourself in terms of achieving goals in a certain amount of time, or have you released that?
Yeah, I would say I've released that.
Okay.
And it's something that I have had to find a balance with as well, because initially I was really held to the fact that like I wanted to do an episode every week, and I held myself to that for like a good year or two, and it caused like a lot of stress, and also a lot of the quality wasn't as high as I wanted to in those early episodes because of that, because like I'm dedicating all my time towards pumping out these episodes every week, and they're not as impactful either, because sometimes I think it's important to let episodes breathe too. Like the impact of them will be so much more if you focus on making them high quality. As I've gotten a little bit later or more vetted in the game, like I've realized that quality over quantity is much more important now. With that said, I think it's important to take accountability on what you need to work on. And I think that I need to be more consistent in pushing out episodes and putting more effort into getting the guests that I want to get on, because I think in the past year I've had some really good episodes, but I don't think I put in the amount of time and effort as I did when I first started, and I need to get back to that place of putting in that time. Granted, now I have way more responsibilities and my life looks a lot different than when I first started, so I think it's important to recognize giving yourself time and being realistic with where you're at. But also, like, I know I can do way better and work way harder than I am currently. So I'd say that in regards to timing, though, at least I've definitely stepped back from having like real expectations of wanting to do things.
Have you heard the stats for podcasts where it's like, I think there's millions of podcasts that have launched, but there's like less than 5% that have more than 10 episodes?
Oh, really?
Yeah, like it's crazy. So like so many people start, but they don't continue.
Yeah.
So that's what I was gonna like, you've been going at this for a while. Like, do you really think that's really like the secret sauce? If you were to name it, it's the consistency?
Yeah, I'd say it's the consistency piece. Then also, I think I mentioned this to you. I'm not sure if it was on camera or off camera, but the feedback that I get from people, not that that's what like the sole purpose of why I do it. It's good reminders of why I'm doing it. Like when people tell me, you know, they started a new hobby or started a new career and it took them to a point of where they're like a manager now, or they're a videographer and they have a career because of they got inspired by certain guests on the episode. You know, things like that are really important to me. And they're reminders of like why I do this. With consistency, I think that when I look back at my previous episodes, whether it's you know, any of the various factors that come at play, whether it's like the audio, the way it sounds, like the marketing of it, the visuals, everything's kind of elevated, you know, and I can see the growth. That also motivates me as well, as like I know that I'm so much better than I was 3 years ago. I'm so much better than I was a year ago. And I've grown so much as a person and as like a host that I like think about that often where, okay, well, where can I be in another year or two or three if I keep this train going? And I try not to tie myself to, I want to be, you know, syndicated or I want this certain sponsorship because I want those things for sure, but I'm doing this more because I love to do it. I'm not doing it because I'm tied to a specific like goal. And there's nothing wrong with having a specific goal, but for me, I think that gives me an advantage in terms of not quitting because I'm doing it from a place of genuinely loving to do it and I enjoy it. So if those other things come, that's awesome. But if they don't, I'm okay with it because I do it because I love it.
Yeah.
So,
And you're stimulated by the growth too. Like you said, you like challenges.
yes.
Is there a certain thing now? Like what's one thing that like you feel like you mastered from since you started and one thing that you're working on now?
I would say one thing I've mastered is the flow of the conversation. It's not coming from like an egotistical standpoint, but I can have a conversation or episode without even preparing for it. I would never
Okay.
do that because
Yeah.
I feel like each guest deserves the right amount of devotion and time. And I can have a much better episode preparing for it than not preparing for it. But I used to be sorry, my throat got a little dry.
Yeah.
I used to be nervous. Like I used to like over prepare sometimes, and you can over prepare for episodes too.
Yeah.
And that can be an issue. But I think my confidence has grown so much in the past like year or two. I like listen to other podcasts sometimes and I like watch other interviews and I don't compare myself, but I realize also my strengths and I think when you're constantly editing your own episodes and when you listen back, because I mean, when I have to edit my own episodes, I'm watching and I'm editing.
Yeah.
And whether it's the audio or video, I'm running through the episodes so many times that it's almost impossible to not try to work on or notice the things that you did bad.
What is it called? Like when an athlete does that, like their playbacks or whatever?
Oh, like they're watching film or
Yeah,
like looking back
it's like
at
what you're
the
doing,
game.
yeah.
No, yeah, and I used to play football like at a high
Okay.
level, and I guess that kind of bleeds into they're reviewing your performance process. Yeah, now that you say that, I never really thought about it. That's kind of what I'm doing
Yeah.
though, because I'm reviewing my performance and seeing what I can improve on. So when I'm doing that, like anything else, repetition breeds excellence, and constantly reviewing and working on yourself, I think breeds the confidence. And that's where I've gauged the confidence factor from in terms of getting better. In terms of what I need to work on, like there's so many things I need to work on. It's so hard to answer that question.
I didn't know if you were going to be like nervous to answer that question.
Not
but
nervous,
you don't,
but
yeah, you're
there's-
like open about it.
Yeah, there's so many things that I need to be better at. And I think that is constantly evolving too. Right now, I think, to be more consistent than I've been. I think that I need to learn how to delegate. And I've recently hired a video editor, which has taken a lot of time off my hands because you can only do so much, right? So if I'm focusing all my energy and time on minute tasks, then I'm never going to be able to devote time to growing the brand and growing the podcast to, you know, a bigger point to where I can impact more people.
Yeah.
So learning how to delegate is a big thing I'm learning about because I have always been very particular about my vision. And that's caused me to want to do everything myself, but there's no way you can grow if you don't have a team. And so many people that are at levels that I want to be at have told me that that like you're not going to last and you're not going to get to the point you want to be if you don't involve other people and not just involve them, but like let them do what they do best. And I haven't learned how to do that yet, but I'm working on it. So
Yeah. You were speaking about watching other podcasts. Are there any other podcast hosts that you really look up to?
yes,
Okay.
there
Because
is.
I feel like each person has like their gift. Like you probably know what your gift is and you can recognize what somebody else's gift is. So I was curious about both, like what you think yours is, which I feel like you've already kind of touched on.
Yeah.
And then somebody that you look up to and what you think theirs is.
There's quite a few, and I'm probably not going to remember
Some good
all
ones
of them.
out.
Oh yeah, for sure. I for sure study people and take little tidbits of what I like of them and try to incorporate it in my own style and my own communication efforts. I would say some of the bigger ones are like Jay Shetty, Joe Rogan. There's a lot of other ones. There's this guy from Complex that I like a lot, and I'm kind of blanking on his name. I like his a lot. I like Bima, who has
Yeah.
the brand Clama.
Mm-hmm.
He's really good. I mean, Joe K as just
Mm.
like a radio host is really good as well in his communication and delivery. There's so many that I'm not thinking of right now that I know once I leave, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
like I should have said
What do you,
them.
I feel like Joe Rogan's so popular that we'll leave him out of it, but like someone
Yeah.
who's like a little bit smaller, like Bima, like what do you think? What do you appreciate about his style?
I think he's so curious. He
Mm.
remains really curious. You can kind of feel it
Okay.
when you hear him ask the questions or just his delivery.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
It's true.
you're
Yeah.
you're aware of him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like he just remains very curious at all times, and
Mm.
he's not ever acting like he knows more than he does. He is like coming from a place of trying to understand and be curious, and I
Yeah.
think that's really important
That's a
aspects.
key.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I always try to come from the approach of I don't know anything. Like even if I do know things in the interview, I try to come from a place of like let me play stupid as if I don't, because that's going to open the door for the guest
Mm-hmm.
to explain it in a way that is easier to understand for the audience, because maybe you know how something is actually done, but if you don't give the guest a chance to explain it, like the audience member isn't going to get a chance to hear it and they might not know as much as you know. So yeah, remaining curious is something that
That's a
I've
huge
noticed from
one.
him.
Yeah. You also mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, I think you said it was Marco McInnes that said something that flipped your perspective. I was curious
Yes.
if there was anything, other lessons you've learned through the process of interviewing people that actually changed the way you operate.
There's so many.
Yeah,
There's a
like are there like a
lot.
couple that stand out where it's like that actually shifted the way I approach the way I'm living?
Yeah, I think there's a few that come to mind initially. AJ Gerard was a really big one. He's an art curator, and what I learned the most from him was the importance of representation and showing other people and leading by example and not just like saying something you can do something, and actually like inspiring people through action. um Marco McInnes's episode, I think for me personally, was just like it changed honestly who I am at a certain level
Wow.
through that episode. And it was the level of like confidence that he has in like knowing that things are going to happen, the way he speaks about himself, the way he speaks to himself, the way he speaks to
Mm.
other people made me really like change the way I talk to myself and the way that I talk to other people as well. Because his whole thing was like it's not just enough to believe that something's going to happen or manifest it or speak it into existence, that you have to really know that it's going to happen. Like if you know it's going to happen, then timing is irrelevant. Like you can literally live into something happening, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And that's the level that's you achieve above manifestation. That's above believing in yourself, is
Yeah.
when you know that it's going to happen. And it's one thing to say you know it, but it's like an internal thing. Like when you know something's going to happen,
Yeah.
you know it. Like you
Mhm.
can't just say you know it, you actually do know it. And then just the episode with Joe K, like I've listened back to that one so many times, but like the way his mind operates is crazy. Like he's such a like high caliber person. He just operates at a certain level that I don't know many people operate at. And the gems that he dropped in that episode were insane, and I got so much value from them. But I will say that I get something from every episode.
Right.
There's always takeaways,
Mhm.
but those are just a few that really impacted me and changed the way I think.
Mhm. Okay, so I have one question.
Yeah.
And my last question that I always ask.
Hmm.
If you could break the mold on one thing, what would it be?
There's a lot of things that I would break the mold on, but if I can speak from something that comes to mind just initially, I would say that it's okay to move at your own pace and to follow your own journey. And what I mean by that is I feel like there's a stigma of if you are a real creative or if you're a real artist, you will dive head first and do solely that one thing. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Like, it's okay to have a day job and do your passion on the side, or it's okay to not have it all figured out initially. I struggled with that at first. Like, I thought I got imposter syndrome because I'm like, I'm not where I need to be, or I'm not successful, or I'm not doing what I need to do if I don't do my passion full time and not have a job. And I think a lot of people probably feel that same way. And I want to break the mold on being okay with moving at my own pace and having a job and letting that support my passion and career. And if I get to a point where this takes over my life as my sole income generator, or my primary one, which is what I would like it to get to just at some point, then that's great and that's amazing. But it doesn't mean that because I have a day job that I'm not successful or I'm not doing what I need to do at the current time. So that's what, like, I think I would like to break the mold on, and what is most relative to my personal career.
I love that. That was so good. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for doing this with me.
Yeah,
I
no
just want you to
problem.
show your
Oh, yeah,
merch
yeah.
to the camera.
Yeah, so
before we end.
this is my new collection that's coming out. It's called the Divine Order Drop. Essentially, it says everything is in divine order. Shout out to Etienne Maurice, who was a guest that I had on the show. He has an amazing collective called Walk at LA. This is going to be a collab with them. Like I said, every guest has a underlying message or theme, and something that he said that resonated really well with the community and audience that Creative Ambiance has and that I have was that everything is in divine order. I think he said, you're perfect just the way you are. If life isn't what you want it to be, you have the power to change it, but everything happens for a reason. Everything is in divine order. So yeah,
I
and
love
on
that.
that.
I love that. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, of course, Alyssa. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh,
Thank you so
that
much.
was
That was
so
awesome.
good.
Yeah, that was
You're
really good.
incredible.
You're a really good host.
Really, you
And
think so?
yeah,
I'm like